Welcome back to part 2 of the series of videos that I'm putting together to review exercise 6. Where we left off was you got to step 6 in the workbook, and once we hit step 7 I asked you to answer question 7A and E on your own and see if you could figure out how to change the various specifications in our pivot table fields to answer those questions. So what I'll do here is I'll work through the steps with you and we'll see if you got the correct answers. So in step 7A, what I ask is how many crimes resulted in an arrest. So this is pretty easily answered by ticking that arrest box and then dragging arrest down to the values box. And what we'll see here is that we have 346 crimes that resulted in an arrest. So for 7A, 346 should be our answer. In question B, I ask you how many crimes occurred during hour 11. And so to answer that question, I would deselect arrests, I would tick hour of day, and I'd place that in my values box. And then I'll go look at row 11. And what we see is that when we look at row 11, we've got 25 incidents that were reported during the 11th hour of the day. And so the answer to question B should be 25. Question C asks how many crimes occurred during hour 22. So I can look down here and see that 30 incidents were reported. And so C, the correct answer would be 30. For D, I ask you how many aggravated assault records there are. To answer this, I would deselect hour of day, and I would tick the first offense box, and then drag that down to the values field. We could look in our pivot table and we could see that we have 106 aggravated assaults being reported in our data set. And then finally, how many vehicle theft records are? Well, we've already got this table up that allows us to answer this question, and we could see that 59 is the correct answer for E. All right, so hopefully you were able to answer these questions on your own. These are pretty basic functions in pivot tables, but we'll move on with the workbook to step 8, where we'll further dissect data using pivot tables. So the first thing I tell you in step 8 is to make sure we've got everything deselected here in our boxes. So we've got a blank canvas in a blank pivot table canvas in our worksheet. And the next thing I tell you to do is to tick the day of week box, and then drag that day of week down to values. Right, so at this point we have counts of crime reported by days of week. Right, this is something we've worked with already, but we can further dissect our data by choosing different variables in this pivot table fields box. So what I tell you to do is to also tick hour of day. And when we do that, what we see is that not only do we have total counts for each day of the week, but we also have those counts broken down by hour of day for each day of week. All right, let's look at another example. So let's uncheck day of week and hour of day, and let's look at step 10, where we are going to slice data down by day of week, but also by category of crime. So the first thing I have you do is tick hour of day. Whoops, my apologies, we're actually working with day of week, so I'll first tick that day of week box, and then we would tick the categories box. And what you'll see is your pivot table becomes broken down by type of crime or category of crime, either property or violent crime, and we've got it broken down by day of the week, right? But we don't have any values here yet. In order to get values here, what we would do is we would click our category label and drag that down to the values box. And what you'll see now is we've got the breakdown of type of crime or category of crime for each day of the week. So as I note in the workbook, the structure of our chart is going to depend on the way in which we have our different variables ordered in the rows column. So for example, right now we're looking at a breakdown of property and violent crime by day of the week. But if I wanted to look at the breakdown of property and violent crimes by day of the week, all I would have to do is to change the order in which these variables appear in the row box. And so that changes the structure of the data that are being displayed in our pivot table. Now this brings us to step 13 of the workbook. And so again, in step 13, I ask you to use the steps that we just covered to answer 3 different questions. Right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to pause the video here. I'm not going to create a new video. I'm just going to ask you to pause and try to figure out sub-questions 1, 2, and 3 of step 13 on your own. And then you can resume the video and see if you got the right answers. Alright, so hopefully you pause me and let's see if you got the right answers. So in the first question I ask you how many aggravated assaults resulted in an arrest. And so to answer this question I would tick the first offense box and arrest box. And then I would drag arrests down to the values box. And so what we can see is that we've got a breakdown of aggravated arrests by whether an arrest, or aggravated assault by whether an arrest was made. And so the answer to this question would be 66. Right? So we've got 66 aggravated assaults that resulted in an arrest. We could look or answer the second question by looking at our vehicle theft column here, and we see that we have 33 vehicle theft incidents that resulted in an arrest. And then finally, how many simple assaults resulted in an arrest? So here we could very easily find that information, and we see that the correct answer is 38. We've got 38 simple assaults that resulted in an arrest. All right, so that brings us to step 13. In step 14, we're going to start creating charts with pivot tables. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to end this video here, and I'm going to start a new one where we start covering the steps that relate to how we can create charts.